Man, I don't even know what to make of this one. Just baffling. Hello and welcome to RotD Review of the Day, and today the movie I'm looking at is 2017's It Comes at Night. This was a really difficult one for me to really wrap my head around in terms of, well, first of all, I want to say that I saw the trailer to this a while back, and it really compelled me. It seemed really interesting. And then it just kind of dropped off the radar. I didn't hear anything about a release. I didn't, I remembered more of the visual elements to the trailer than the name of the movie itself. And I started this movie just kind of as a bit of a random pick. I sorted by critical rating and kind of just kind of scrolled through a little while and ultimately landed on this one and decided let's give this a whirl and review it for the RotD channel here. And then all of a sudden I recognized the visuals and, oh, that was that trailer I saw. Cool. Looking forward to this one. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that I didn't really care for it. That's just the ultimate fact of this one. But why? And this is the portion of being a film critic, especially when you're doing daily reviews, that becomes a little difficult. It's not just being analytical of the film itself; it's also being introspective and fleshing out the emotions that you were feeling while watching it, and being able to put those feelings into words and into a proper review. And ultimately where I think I landed on this one is for a visual storytelling medium, as movies are, there's always this balance between substance and style, and this one just felt way too unbalanced on the style portion than the substance portion. Ultimately I just found it a bit disappointing, and in order to kind of get into a little bit more of that, let's get into the categories. As always, 4 different categories, each one worth up to 25 points for a total possible score of 100 points. And the plot of this one, I gave a 15 out of 25. I thought it was very competent in some of the beats that it hit. It had a fairly average, I would say, storyline, core. And it told it in a fairly average way. The characters just weren't terribly compelling. That's one of my bigger complaints about this. When you have the style over substance, the substance, one of those things being the characters, it felt very lacking. It was very slow, and there are movies out there that are purposefully slow that I really, really enjoy. And I hear people complain, "Oh, it's slow." And I think that there is a big difference between being slow and being deliberately paced. And maybe that sounds like a pretentious statement. But if I take a movie like Unbreakable, for me, that's not slow. That's perfectly deliberately paced in service of the storytelling. And in this one, I can see that attempt. For me, it just didn't sell. So it where the director might have been going for deliberate pacing, I ultimately found it to be slow. That's actually probably going to affect the intent more than the plot. But where I really landed on this one is that this is really nothing we've seen, or nothing that we haven't seen before. The plot of it follows a man and his family, and they're out in the middle of the woods, and they have a nice house there, and everything's boarded up, and they're going out with respirators and gloves and so forth on, and they're very much appear to be living off the grid. Why? Well, let's take the questions and put them in a box. Then he runs into somebody that was breaking into the house, and upon interrogating him, he found that this person was simply looking for supplies, didn't know the house was occupied, and he has a family that is some distance away that he was foraging for. So the struggle becomes, do we take in this family? Do we believe this guy? How do we approach this? Why? What threat is there that, that's raising all this distrust? Let's take that question and put it in the box. They and the story progresses with, they explain the situation as far as their daily living routine goes, and the fact that they don't go out at night if they can avoid it. Why? Well, let's take that question and let's put it in the box. There's an incident that happens with the dog that, it runs off and then it's suddenly silenced. A little, not terribly spoilery there. It's just kind of a middle of the storyline plot there. But why does that happen? Well, let's take that question and let's put it in the box. And the storyline progresses from there with one family, kind of butting heads as far as trust and mistrust, and whether or not to help with their survival. Against what threat are they trying to survive? Well, let's take that question, let's put it in the box, and the movie really progresses from there. Now, let's take that box full of questions, and guess what? You're going to get to the end of this movie, and it's not going to answer a single one. There are some movies that do that, and that is fine. And for I don't know, this one, it felt like it was trying to be something that it wasn't. Stylistically, it was trying to be very cerebral. The slow pacing, the long shots, the questions unanswered and left to ambiguity, and ultimately, I just never got to that point with this movie. It felt contrived in that, and I never felt like it was elevated to the point of being that level of cerebral abstract that would make that compelling. A movie like, say, Mother, that requires multiple viewings and a lot of thought and so forth. This one never got to that point for me. I really kind of strictly was going for what was on screen, and when you combine that with the lack of substance and the overabundance of style, it wound up being boring to me. So that was that kind of hit a lot of points for a lot of different categories, and an overall arc there doesn't necessarily belong in the rant of plot. But regardless, the plot, for the sake of scoring here, was fairly competent, and the setting and the pacing and the paths that the characters went on was good and competent. It just wasn't great. So 15 out of 25 for the plot. Now, the intent, that's kind of where all that diatribe, that rant that I went on there really affects things. I gave the intent 6 out of 25. If it was trying to be scary, it wasn't. If it was trying to be cerebral and abstract, it wasn't. And in that effort on both, it wound up just kind of falling on its face. It was you could see what it was attempting, and it just didn't ever get to that level. None of the scares really worked for me. I think there was some dream elements that was kind of peppered throughout the movie that wound up taking away from a lot of the scariness to me. Any sense of dread that the movie was trying to pull out of the audience, it just turned into, well, that was a dream. Okay. So, and it ended up just being a snoozer. And any intention it had, which was very clear, of it being take the setting, this ambiguous setting and situation, and use it as the backdrop to reveal the horrors of the human condition and humanity, and the level of animalistic survivalist instinct we have, and our mistrust of one another, and how evil we can be to one another. It's nothing that we haven't seen before, and seen a lot better than It Comes at Night. So yeah, 6 out of 25. I think the intention is where this movie really fell down. The acting, I gave a 19 out of 25. It was actually pretty good performances. The Joel Edgerton, Christopher Abbott, they did a great job with this. The And everybody else around them did a very, very good job. I have no real complaints about the acting. Honestly, as far as the fact that the characters weren't compelling, that was a failure on, in my opinion, the story and the direction. So I'm not going to mark down the actors for things that weren't their fault. They what they had and what they were given to work with, they pulled out. So, yeah, high marks for the acting. I was pretty impressed with that level of this movie. So 19 out of 25 there. The technical, this one I kind of beat my head against the table for a little while on. I wound up giving it 17 out of 25, and the best way I can really put that is the odd style choices for camera angles, long shots, and the pacing and so forth, which would be technically considered a technical aspect of this. It didn't work for me, but it also didn't, those elements in and of themselves did not take away from the movie for me. It didn't allow it to rise up to the intention it was going for. However, it wasn't so odd and so peculiar and so distracting that it actually took away from the movie for me. I mean, if it had been more harsh in that regard, then I could see it potentially, actually pulling me out of the movie and that being an element of points taken away. But as it stands, I'm just going to say it's already caused the points in the intent category to be dropped sufficiently, and it not being for me otherwise is not a good reason for me to pull points away in the technical category. So I'm leaving that even keel as far as the long shots and the camera angles. The setting and the details and the level in there was very believable, very well done. I had to really appreciate the level of detail for the survivalist aspect of this, and the methodology in which the characters kind of approached each situation. The effects were good. The blood effects were good. I have no real complaints in that regard. Nothing really made the technical aspect of this movie stand out, but it was okay. So 17 out of 25 for the technical, and that gives us a total score of 57 out of 100 points. Ultimately, this was a fairly competent movie. It just wasn't compelling, and for having the shots that it did, and for having the angles that it did, and for having the ambiguity that it did, and for attempting to be the cerebral powerhouse that it was, it ultimately just kind of tripped on its own shoelaces. And that was a little tough for me to forgive. And ultimately, this movie wound up being, as much as the hype as I felt toward it watching the trailer, it wound up being a bit of a mediocre film. So that's just generally how I feel about It Comes at Night. I appreciate you joining me today. I don't know if I'm going to have a deep dive on this one. Look for it. I will post it if I do. I'm kind of struggling with whether or not to do it. There's really not a whole lot of detailed aspects to this one that I really want to dissect necessarily. And I have a feeling if I try, I'm just going to kind of wind up railing on the movie. And it's not a bad movie. I'm not going to say that, I would talk anybody out of watching it if they wanted to. So as far as me just going on a deep dive and railing on it, that doesn't seem fair either. So I'm probably just going to leave this one alone and leave it as a review only. I'm going to go back and I'm going to kind of pepper through the movie, and if I find things that I specifically want to talk about, then maybe I will. But that should about do it for today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.